Hello humans. So in the previous video I went through who the target audience for this course is, and if you haven't checked that out, just look at the first video in the playlist and maybe follow along from there. So in this section of the course we'll be going over the overview of the course. So in here I'll be telling you what we'll be doing over the course, over the TypeScript Essential course. So without any further delays, let's get started. So before we get our hands dirty and dive into some coding, we'll get to know what TypeScript, this thing called TypeScript, is and why we should be using it, the motivation behind using TypeScript instead of JavaScript, because that's the main comparison most times. We'll get to set up our coding environment. So we'll install Node.js and then set up TypeScript. I'll explain in the setup video what this thing called Node.js is. So no need to worry about that right now. And then after that, since we'll have our environment set up, so we can get our hands dirty a bit by writing our first TypeScript program. So hope you get excited for this one. So after that, we'll just go over some basic concepts of programming, like your variable declarations, your variable types, functions. And then once we feel confident enough to go over these things, that once we feel confident enough about the basics, then we can get to go a bit further by doing some interfaces and classes. So that'll be very exciting. So yeah. So what is this thing called TypeScript? And why should you care? So TypeScript is a programming language developed by Microsoft. So most people are like, hey, we already have a lot of programming language. Why do we need another one? So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So what that means is whatever everything in JavaScript is TypeScript. But then TypeScript is actually more. So the reason for this is because, so like I said at the end of my previous video, JavaScript is too flexible. It just lets you do things. And sometimes it's good if you're playing around in your room at home, just making simple programs. But once you're working in a production environment and you're catering to a lot of people, you don't want to be that flexible, because you want things to be strict so that things don't break. Because sometimes if things are too flexible, you don't really know how to manage it. So now TypeScript is like that manager. So before you actually push your code into production and have bugs, like, so TypeScript will actually tell you, oh wait, something looks wrong over there, maybe you should check it out. Sometimes you can ignore it if you really know, okay, this is actually what I want to do. You can tell TypeScript, hey, no, I actually know what I'm doing here, so you can leave that one alone. But most of the time, it picks these things up, and that you wouldn't be able to pick up if you were using JavaScript. So yeah, we'll get to see more of this once we actually start programming. So yeah, sorry. So like I said in the previous explanation, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So this is why this next explanation is important. So the reason TypeScript transpiles down to JavaScript, and some people say compiles down, but it's really kind of the same thing in this case. So compilation is when you compile your code, which means convert your code to a different language. What that actually means is you are converting the code. So you write your code in JavaScript or TypeScript, and then when your computer needs to run it, it compiles it down to machine code, right? Maybe you don't know about that. Maybe you do. So it compiles it down to machine code, which is a lower level language. So we have different levels of abstraction, and JavaScript and TypeScript are kind of on the same level. So when you convert one programming language into another programming language, but they are kind of on the same level of abstraction, then that is transpiling. So TypeScript and JavaScript have the same level of abstraction rather. So yeah. So why should we use TypeScript? So it improves development time by catching bugs in development. I think I kind of went into that earlier. So what it does is, okay, so let's say you have a, maybe I shouldn't explain this here. I'll explain this with code in the next sections. So the TypeScript compiler, I like I said, is too flexible. So it lets you do things that you maybe don't necessarily want to do. So TypeScript caches those things so that those things don't go into production and break things. And when things break, that means you have to change them, right? So yeah. So by the virtue of using TypeScript, you get to avert most of those issues so that you don't have this back and forth cycle from development into production unnecessarily. One other thing is, most people with big projects are already using JavaScript and like, oh, I'm going to need to convert all my code into TypeScript, sorry. And then that will take up a lot of time. Then I would say you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it bit by bit because TypeScript is easily integrated with JavaScript. So you can have your JavaScript and your TypeScript sitting in the same environment, and both could be serving in production. So you can yeah. So you can do it slowly, and then end up having TypeScript in your whole project. You don't just have to go boom all at once, swap JavaScript for TypeScript. No. So unlike languages like Dart and CoffeeScript, which are kind of they are new languages in the sense that CoffeeScript code is not JavaScript code, but TypeScript code is JavaScript code. So yeah. So maybe JavaScript code is TypeScript code. Yeah. And one other thing that we developers like, not necessarily, but we create things or like functions. Let's say I have a function there, and then I have a function name. Maybe I named it correctly, maybe I didn't. And then, unless we're talking about JavaScript in this case, and there's no. Sometimes some people, yeah, you have your documentation explaining what this function does, but with TypeScript, that gets easier. So you have so since you'll be having your types next to your functions, and then the person who is not you, or maybe future you, will be looking at the code and saying what's going on here. Sometimes it gets easier when you look at it from there, and like, okay, this is a function that creates a user, takes in the user argument, because there's actually a type describing the user argument next to the function if you're using Typescript. And then, yeah, before even looking at the body of the code, trying to figure out what it does, you can see from the top that, okay, this makes sense so far. Sometimes you get stuck at that step, like, what is going on here? What does this thing mean? And yeah, so hopefully I explained that well. If I didn't, or if you think I can improve on some things, some explanations, just comment below, so I can learn from you guys as well. So in the next section, I think we'll be setting up our environment. So yeah.